We've been talking about A Good Marriage, directed by Eric Romer. And that's where we have to leave you for this programme. We will be back next week, but on behalf of all of us at Meridian, goodbye.
We're gaining people and losing people, and we're changing time zones all the time, and various of our frequencies are going off to carry Somali or Romanian or Hindi or something like that, and then they come back to us, and we have to remind people that they're tuned to the BBC broadcasting in English. In about 10 seconds, I shall be announcing a pre-recorded programme. So if you'll hang on, I'll just speak to the world.
That's the end of the news from London.
BBC World Service presents The World Today. Now, I noticed that went on at 9 minutes and 19 seconds. And if I can find my pencil, I've only just arrived, so I haven't got everything yet. That was 9:19. Now, what's coming on next is The Week in Wales. My next absolute...
Time to get up. Time to get up. It is a rule that we're not supposed to touch them.
Time to get up.
We're only supposed to shake the bedspread.
Thanks, yeah.
One man was very difficult. 4 men come over, he still wouldn't get up. The announcer came, he still wouldn't get up. Then the DO he came down, and then he get up. 2.5 hours late.
Говорит Лондон. В эфире русская служба BBC. Доброе утро. В Лондоне 4 часа 45 minut.
Bağımsız Zimbabwe devletinin ilk hükümetini kurmaya çağırdı.
Katerega stranka je dobila 20 sedežev.
This is London.
Thank you.
Adieu, bonjour, bonjour, whatever it is, wherever you are. You learn little bits like that. If you go to the Arabic, it's halamakha, samadahak, which is Somali. In Latin American, Benito Comancheros, which means the old bandit. Italians, they say La Fucci Beneluti, which means man with a loud voice.
The hub of the external services is this rather aging building, Bush House. And from here we broadcast in 37 different languages at a cost to the government of around £70 million a year. And for that money, this country gets a regular audience of over 100 million people. Because of cuts, we have declined in the league table in terms of the number of hours we broadcast. But I'm happy to say that we still remain first in the league in terms of the audience we get. We get the biggest audience of any international broadcaster in the world.
Shortwave, all the time.
I think many people overseas find it very difficult to understand that although the government pays us the money, they do not have the editorial control.
Because I think there are sometimes big problems for people coming here into the BBC, which is that we do have a different attitude, particularly to people like politicians or senior businessmen, you know, with loads of money and all the rest of it, which is that only in very exceptional circumstances, for instance, would we furnish people with a list of questions. I know certainly in some parts of the subcontinent, a minister would not agree to be interviewed unless he had a list of questions. But they are likely to, if not literally write out their answers, but have planned it out to such an extent that it's flat as a pancake, boring, and all you get is the official line. And on the whole, we are not after an official line.
Newsroom, Mrs. Reagan.
Mrs. Reagan.
Mrs. Reagan. And Mr. Thatcher. Mrs. Thatcher up from Parliament on point 2, and Reagan's just about to have a news conference in Washington that's patched through onto Newsroom point 7.
Perhaps the right honourable gentleman did hear our ambassador on the news.
The news conference is now scheduled for 20 minutes. The occasion is currently on ice as long as martial law lasts. So the only other thing...
Pretty extraordinary, Bob, isn't it?
I wouldn't know, honestly. They seem to think it's extraordinary here.
Say to the right of the Soviet Union's Warsaw Pact allies are speeding up modernization of their armed forces.
We don't know who it was. We assumed it was Bush.
This is Mark Brain in Vienna.
Well, this is your first day in the newsroom, so it must be confusing for you. Now, this newsroom's just about unlike any other newsroom you've ever worked in before. We're on the air all day, 24 hours a day. Remember that today is today in Britain and it's yesterday somewhere else and it's tomorrow somewhere else, so we try and avoid today's, tomorrow's and yesterday's. Our spring is someone else's autumn, our winter is someone else's summer.
In a march to mark the anniversary of the death of Bobby Sam.
Any hope.
But what you're going to remember when you write is that you're not just writing for an English audience, you're also writing for an audience that may be listening with English as a second language, so it's difficult for them to understand. They may be listening under terrible conditions, i.e. shortwave, and reception might be poor. And also, every word you write is going to have to be translated. I couldn't begin to tell you the problems we have with translations. For example, if we spoke about a single-handed transatlantic yacht race, that has actually been translated as a one-armed transatlantic yacht race. My job is to decide what goes into these bulletins and how it's written. And what I personally try and do is sit myself up in the clouds and look at the world as a whole. Because I'm in London, because I'm British, I can't take sides. And you're the same when you're writing your story, you can't take sides. But always remember that one man's guerrilla is another man's freedom fighter. We've got several sources of information. Perhaps one of the major ones is our own monitoring unit at Caversham, set out in the countryside near Reading. It's inside, it's rather ancient, with some rather ancient equipment, although they are trying to update it. The Russians are very suspicious of it. I think they think we use it for spying. But what in fact it does is 24 hours a day, it monitors foreign radio stations, decides what the most interesting things that are being said on them are, and feeds it back to us.
Moscow World Service in English.
Center will have a polling station. Among the nominees,
And then we have Tehran in Persian. And Madrid in Spanish.
Ratificación en medios norteamericanos se dijo entonces que el ingreso de España reforzaba la orden material.
Baghdad in Arabic. Ankara in Turkish. And Radio South Africa. There are clues. For instance, just say Hungarian. When they want to say in a country or in a town, they say London, Bonn. Right? So if it's a news bulletin, they're obviously talking about places, and it's got to be happening somewhere. It's in somewhere. So you hear a town or a country and Bonn after it, you know this is likely to be Hungarian. And then something like Indonesian, which most people won't recognize, but they have no plurals. If they want to say dogs, they don't say dogs, they say dog, dog. So if you listen to the language, although you don't understand a single word of it, if you hear double words often, they are plurals in Indonesian.
From where it's situated, of course, Caversham can pick up a lot of the world, but some countries, the radio station signals are so weak that we have to have outlying stations dotted around the world. And one of the major ones is just outside Nairobi, and from there they monitor most of the East African radio stations.
During the Uganda trouble some years ago, we were monitoring here, and I had a piece put on my desk which subbed. It was what we call a Z item, it's a flash item. sent back to UK and broadcast back to us within 10 minutes. We don't normally worry about the reaction of any foreign governments. We're particularly anxious not to upset our host government, Kenya, and we never have done. That is to say, the monitoring service has never done so. Sometimes television made a blasted nuisance of itself by such as Lord Chalfont, who produced a terrible television film which slanged the Kenya hierarchy, which didn't go down at all well. We nearly got thrown out as a result of it. At the moment, things are fairly quiet, but we have every expectation of it blowing up again very soon. Siad Barre in Somalia, I think, is walking a tightrope. Mengistu, he's certainly liable to get a bullet in him at any moment. Obote, I think he's probably on his way out, so there are skids under him. At the moment, things are very quiet indeed, but this could change overnight.
12 hours, Greenwich Mean Time.
BBC World Service presents Radio Newsreel.
One of our other major sources of information, of course, is our own correspondents who are dotted throughout the world. These chaps work for both domestic radio, domestic television and ourselves. We have them in most major capitals. People like Mark Tully in India, for instance.
With peaceful bulletins and reels. Mark Tully.
The dispatch for the... It's a strange feeling, really. You're writing for two audiences. You know you're writing for a world audience, but you also know that you're writing for a very attentive local audience. Quite often it's funny, you know, you get crises in India and foreign correspondents flock in from all around the world, and they go to the villages, and the villagers say, "Are you from the BBC? Are you Mark Tully?" And they say, "No, we're from the Washington Post, or we're from the Voice of America." They say, "Oh, well, we want to talk to the BBC. Why hasn't the BBC come to talk to us?" I remember particularly once when a new government was formed in India after a long-lasting political crisis. And I went round to see the new Prime Minister, and as I entered the sort of courtyard of his house, I was surrounded by great, tough, burly farmers, supporters of his from northern India, just up the road here. And they said to me, "You're Mark Tully, aren't you?" Now, I don't know how they recognized me, but they seemed to do so. And they said that you said that Mr. Jagjeevan Ram, who's our man's opponent, was going to win the contest. And he didn't, did he? And I literally had to be rescued by some of the politer and more gentle supporters of the victor, Mr. Charan Singh, and taken to see him. Because what the BBC says in India and in Indian villages does matter an awful lot.
Since the new advisory body was thought specifically to have been created to accommodate Ye and some other veterans of the party, the fact that they are conspicuously absent from it appears to upset a great deal of the conventional wisdom. Stephen Jessel, BBC, P. King. 3 spellings for you: Ye Jen Ying, Y Yellow, E Edward, J Jeremy. New word, J.
Life here is very frustrating professionally because we simply don't have the access to the news. You cannot pick up a phone and ring somebody. I mean, once somebody phoned me up from London and said, "Will you ring up Deng Xiaoping's press officer and see whether he's in good health?" That, in the context of China, is a question so meaningless as to be ridiculous. Deng Xiaoping's health is a closely guarded secret. He doesn't have a press officer, and if he did, I wouldn't have his telephone number. There are Chinese who are authorized to deal with foreigners, and one talks with them, and one tries to find out about their daily lives. Because most journalists here, I think, although we do the political stuff, we're much more interested in the way the Chinese live, what their hopes and aspirations are, you know, whether they enjoy life. After all, here we are living in a country of 1,000 million people, and who do we see? I mean, a few dozen Chinese and other foreigners. And it's a ludicrous paradox, because people back home are much more interested in how do the Chinese live than they are in who has replaced who on the Politburo. It can get very lonely here. I remember during the Falklands crisis, when that dominated radio and television in Britain for 2-3 months, however long it was. I felt here in China, when actually nothing very much was happening, like one of those Japanese soldiers who's not been told the Second World War is over. I mean, you're sitting there, but nobody knows or cares whether you're there. And you have to get out of China fairly regularly if you're going to keep your sanity, I think.
And while the basic infrastructure of peace still remains, the diplomatic relations, the trade, the open borders, more and more Egyptians are arguing that Egypt's peace with Israel was a mistake which merely provoked more violence in a region which has had its fair share of war. This is Bob Jobbins reporting from Jerusalem.
The Israeli Prime Minister, Mr. Begin, he listens to the BBC every morning. We know that King Hussein of Jordan listens. The late President Sadat used to listen as well. And they listen because from the BBC they can get some kind of overall picture of what's happening. People do tune in, particularly in times of crisis, at times of war. They feel that they need more information than they can get from their local radio stations, whether they're the Arab stations in Damascus or Beirut, or the Israeli radio station here. They want more information than they can get. They want it from, if you like, a more objective source.
I've just been to France. Usually when we do an interview, we tend to interview an MP or a leader of the union. We very rarely have people in the street, and they're very important. So I thought it would be a good idea to see if they were conscious of what was happening in Britain. Do they criticize it? Do they respond to it?
Madame, qu'est-ce que vous pensez de la Grande-Bretagne? Ben, moi, je ne suis pas très au courant, mais enfin, quand j'entends comment ils vivent plus malheureux que les Français. Mais maintenant, nous, on va les rattraper dans le malheur. Ils sont malheureux parce qu'il faut faire des restrictions, mais nous, on ne pouvait pas vivre sans restrictions. Et on va être obligé de vivre avec des restrictions.
Madame Thatcher, par exemple, et qu'est-ce que vous en pensez de cette dame?
Il y a une chose qui m'a déplu, c'est la mort de ces jeunes gens-là. Ça, je trouve que c'est une tâche à son blason, mais pour le reste, pour les Malouines, pour nous, on dit les Malouines.
Le gouvernement français a soutenu la Grande-Bretagne, a été le premier en Europe. Je ne pense pas que le gouvernement français aurait pu penser que Mme Thatcher allait si loin. Je ne pense pas que la France aurait réagi de la même façon. On est peut-être un peu moins rigoureux. Je crois.
Dans la communauté économique, par exemple.
Moi, ce qui me sidère le plus, c'est l'attitude des gens, par exemple, qui votent travaillistes, qui sont vraiment, d'après la presse, ils sont tellement opposés à l'idée de la Grande-Bretagne dans l'Europe. Pour moi, je ne comprends pas cette attitude.
It turned out superbly. Some people that you stop in the street and you think, well, we're going to make a very bad interview. They probably don't think, they don't even know that Britain exists. Well, it was exactly the opposite.
At the moment, French people are very interested in Mrs. Thatcher because they're wondering to what extent you can actually have a very firm hand and to what extent it can succeed. So, of course, if she manages to end a strike, it's marvelous for the French. It means that's it. We had enough of weak governments and it works. So, really, that is the main point of interest. Tune
in at 13:30 for The Other Side of Silence. How do you like the show so far? Worth staying tuned to the World Service of the BBC? Good.
Well, with Sports Roundup. As a writer, I preferred, in this book anyway, to stand in judgment on their
این بود مشروع تازه ترین خبرهای جهان.
This is page 3, cues 1 to 16.
Almost time for me to go.
Yes.
My train's due in about 5 minutes. You were very good.
I think you can afford to come work a little closer in than that. What I would do, Charles, if you move your chair around to the sort of like that and work just across the mic a little bit, probably would be easier. Shirley.
Hello, sweetheart.
I think I do need some beryl in the background, beryl and myrtle, some myrtle in the background. So a bit of chat to match up with what's going on over there with the washing up.
Beryl. You've forgotten the lettuce in the ham sandwiches.
Sorry, Mrs.
I told you about it yesterday.
Yes, Mrs. Bagger.
And go and clean that table if you don't mind.
Yes, Mrs. Bagger. Right away, Mrs. Bagger.
Okay, hold it there. That's fine. Play Beryl's line a bit further back, can you?
Sorry, it's not my fault.
They're broadcasting next door.
I know. Well, they shouldn't have paper-thin walls. Oops, how are you, kid?
Oh, all right. Have a good journey.
Got held up round Bush House. Been sat out there for 10 minutes.
How are the demonstrators?
That's a nice name. Crescentia.
Right.
Crescentia Rosario. That sounds...
Very good.
There's somewhat... Actually, the thing I like about this more than anything else is the messages that people send to each other. You know, you are the light of my life. I mean, here we say things like, love you and miss you madly, see you soon, doll round the back of the bike sheds. But whenever all these different countries have lovely ways of expressing their desires, don't they?
That's right, yes.
They're really nice.
Yeah. There's a good one on over here, look.
Which one? Roy Millett from
Kaiser Gunge.
Gunge.
Kaiser Gunge.
I wonder if half the people around the world know what gunge means in English. Should be all right. Once it starts thumping away. Come on, thump. Yeah. That's okay.
Sorry. Right, stand by.
Almost time for me to go.
Yes.
My train's due in about 5 minutes.
I think that's okay. I might like to do one more of those.
You choose scripts to be heard really everywhere. In Montevideo, in New York, in Tokyo. And when we get into the realms of anything which is specifically British, you've got to be quite careful, because it's no good doing a play which depends upon the fact that British people do their shopping in supermarkets or shops. Well, 95% of the world's population don't. They go to a market and barter for things. Details like that can rule out a lot of themes. However, there are, if you think about it, lots of universal themes. A lot of other nations could challenge us in many fields, but I don't think anyone comes near us in dramatic literature. That is known worldwide, and people actually want to hear these kind of plays. There are thousands, hundreds of thousands of students studying for their O and A levels, not in Rotherham or Caterham or Penzance, but actually in little tiny villages in West Africa and in India and in South America.
And how else can they hear these plays, let alone played by the very best actors in the world?
Wait to see you into yours.
No, no, please don't. I'll come over to your platform with you. I'd rather.
That's excellent. No problems there at all. We'll buy that.
Some people say that the audience for drama on radio in the United Kingdom is declining. Our audience is actually growing, and it's a big, new, young audience. It's probably in the region of 30 million. And that's, well, I hate to say it, but that's about 3 times the biggest BBC One drama audience.
Why can I never get in this studio? Yes, it's a jolly good show from the BBC's Wild Service. This is the programme that made more people switch to television than anything else. But you stayed with us, haven't you, because you're lovely. If you do get your name read out on the air, then you get one of our BBC guaranteed unshrinkable T-shirts as long as you don't wash them. So we'll start off today.
Bush House is like a cross between the Tower of Babel and a beehive. There are people buzzing away in little cells, incredibly dedicated to what they're doing.
Okay, here it is.
About the Caversham modernisation plan.
And on that one, you got Flutter.
Can't pagar com dancing. Look at myself. Yes, we'll go up now. We'll go up. Okay, thank you. Second
Well, I think it all depends on the state of the Iranian army, whether they could advance on Iraq properly and take over Baghdad.
Well, it will be interesting to see what Jordan will do.
Mengine ya kisiasa, mengine mambo ya kawaida, mengine mambo ya sayansi.
Wie konnte wirklich jemand ein Brieffix verwechseln mit etwas, was nicht eine Vorsicht ist? Und she should know better.
Sur une plage publique, non. Non, ils sont pas dans le contexte naturel, non. Je suis pas d'accord.
Moi, j'aime mieux.
Ouais, t'aimes bien? Et alors, par contre, parce que tu vois, parce qu'elle disait, tu vois, elle disait, moi, quand je vois des femmes, au bout d'un 2 jours, bon, ça va, je regarde les trucs des femmes.
This one is 7 letters again, E for Edward.
Edward, blank R for Robert, blank R for Robert, blank blank. Such parts as this are damaged with loud instruments.
And Cliff, I know, is absolutely marvellous, wonderful bass voice.
Ili habari juu ya vifaru vya Tanzania. Unajua wanajaribu kuhifadhi vifaru kule Tanzania.
Mimi hapa nataka Kenya.
M for mother, blank S for sugar, blank E for Edward, blank blank. Vessels with no manservant.
Elle manque totalement de sensibilité, oui.
Un homme. Est-ce que ça lui fait quelque chose?
Premier jour, deuxième jour, troisième jour, quatrième, 15e jour. Après 45 ans, je continuerai.
Mais quand tu vois une fille en maillot de bain, ça te fait pas plus quelque chose que de voir la fille, de voir...
Non, mais je suis quand même sensible.
I'm head of the BBC Somali service. It was a shock to us as well as to our listeners when last year the British government had in mind to cut our service along with others. It would have destroyed very valuable links between the BBC and an important part of the Horn of Africa. This is radio country. Everyone in Somalia, if he can afford it, will have a radio.
BBC London ساعة أفريقيا عبري وشنتي بركي وحنا.
At 5:30, everything stops, and people switch into the BBC Somali service. The type of program is to suit the various types of Somali speakers, sophisticated people from the towns, farmers, nomadic herdsmen, and we tried to explain to them in a simple language as possible what world events are about, Somali traditional culture, poetry, which is extremely popular. We do have a program in which people write to us to try and trace missing relatives. I used to think it was one of my achievements until I got a letter from a lady saying, "What the hell do you mean by putting my name over the radio as being missing? You don't know the reason why I'm missing. It might be I just don't want my husband. And I think you are interfering in the personal rights of people." And then we couldn't put that out, but after a couple of months we had a similar letter from a man saying, "I understand from my friends that you've been trying to trace me. Why? What have I done to you?" Although our programs are very popular, I do find sometimes when I come to Somalia on a duty tour that there are people in high places who are really very cross with us on the grounds that certain of our programs are not complementary to the activities of the government.
The fact that the BBC Somali service, which is so much respected and admired generally in Somalia, is putting over some of the views, quite often the views of the Somali dissidents, which are totally hostile, of course, to the present government in Somalia, is a major irritant, major difficulty for me in my relations with the Somali government, with President Siad and his ministers.
Some informations are not accurate, are said in a way, perhaps such of sensational things, not properly evaluated and not true.
What can you do? You cannot please everybody. We really believe that the ordinary Somali wants to know what is going on from sources which are not available from his own local radio. The young people today are the leaders of tomorrow, they say. Their attitudes towards happenings in the world can be governed by what they listen to. I think it's a great pity that a country with Britain's reputation now, suddenly they say we don't need links with certain countries because we must have small savings. It is not even sufficient for 1 mile of tarmac road in Britain. The country which straddles the Gulf of Aden, as well as the Indian Ocean, is very, very important today.